Welcome to Pathways, Becoming Trauma Responsive, where we explore trauma through a compassionate lens, discover how these experiences affect each of us differently, and dive deeper into what it really means to become more trauma-informed. I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Meeker, Senior Director of the New York State Trauma Informed Network and Resource Center, funded by the New York State Office of Mental Health. The network advances the collective understanding of trauma, wellness and healing, and trauma-informed practices in action. This podcast is produced by CCSI. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the New York State Office of Mental Health or CCSI. This is a special edition of Pathways, where we travel outside of New York State to hear and learn from national experts. Well, Jan, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this episode of Pathways, Becoming Trauma Responsive. We're so glad to have you here today. I'd love to have you start off by introducing you to our listening audience. And I know you have many roles and many hats in terms of being a psychotherapist in the area of trauma and addiction, and clinic director, lecturer, and author of 2 books, but really would welcome you to introduce yourself to our audience and talk a little bit about your own personal journey into this work.
Yeah, that's always a great place to start.
Yes.
I do have my own trauma story in terms of what happened in my family of origin with my mom struggling a lot with mental health issues. My dad left, then came back. So there's a lot of, and had his own histories around addiction and whatever. So I carry that in my body. And then I graduated from an MSW program, and right out of school, got a job in a really high needs area at the edge of Toronto where I live. And I was asked to run a group for young women who were incest survivors. And thank you for noticing that in your body, because so often when I talk about that, people dissociate.
Right.
Nothing comes back. And I saw that in you. And this is actually part of working with the nervous system, right? And with trauma, is we notice, we co-regulate with each other, and we notice, oh, when I said that, your body had this response. And so that tells my body that you're present. And that tells my nervous system that I'm beginning to feel safe with you. So much going on there that really demonstrates what I wanted to share today with folks. And so there I was. Luckily, I'd had my own wonderful journey in psychotherapy personally. Just lucky to meet the therapist that I did. He didn't work directly in the body, but he worked very experientially. And he was a meditator. So he had his own place of calming himself down and soothing himself. And I could feel that in my own body. And in polyvagal language, we would say, my nervous system co-regulated well with his. And I really got a chance to be reparented in that process, which is what this work in many ways is about. So I sat with these women and I listened to them with what I call depathologizing ears. I didn't come at it from a traditional diagnostic and statistical manual approach. I had a mom who, while she had lots of issues, she was a staunch feminist. And that was such a gift because she gave me the capacity to understand the journey of liberation for women and also to shift paradigms easily. And so I was able to really hear what was happening for these young women and to see it in their bodies. And I went searching for alternative ways of helping them. And the first way I found was through Jean Genlin's work with focusing and working with what people are now talking about more so, the felt sense. And that's part of the model that I use and that I brought in to then working with the nervous system when I was lucky enough really to meet Steve Porges personally. And that changed my life.
Yeah.
So it was kind of the beginning.
So I'm thinking that, kind of this felt sense approach and polyvagal may be new to a lot of people. And so I think it would be great if you could explain a little bit more about this approach, how it's a real paradigm shift from traditional kind of approaches to treatment and what it brings to the table.
Yeah, it is a real paradigm shift because it's a model, most of our models now are pretty top down. We focus a lot on, cognitive behavior therapy. And well, I think, those therapies are great.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're wonderful. But what we're learning more and more is that they're not as effective if we don't feel safe in the body, which
Mm-hmm.
means that prefrontal cortex is relaxed and online and we're thinking, and we all know this intuitively, right? You know
Mm-hmm.
that if you're upset, you're more likely to forget something or to not be able to concentrate and read
Mm-hmm.
a novel or
Mm-hmm.
and so when I went searching, I found Gendlin's work, and he was really much more about noticing and having done a lot of research with therapists and clients who reported positive outcomes, noticing that real change actually happens in the body. That when we are held and we feel safe in that therapeutic relationship or in a friendship,
Mm-hmm.
it's like what he found was that this change that happens in the body, it happens all the time in life. It's a natural process in the body where we need to pause and slow down, which is hard in our
Right.
top-down world.
Yeah.
And so what he noticed, he did these, he looked at tape recordings. It was way back in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
He and Carl Rogers did
Wow.
these studies of thousands of therapists and clients
Mm-hmm.
were successful. And he found these pauses in the recordings. And so he interviewed them and said, what was going on here? Because nobody was talking.
Mm-hmm.
And what was going on that he grew to understand through really listening to the clients and the therapists was that these were people who were comfortable to really pause and be quiet and to listen to what the body's information was about the problem in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was picking up on these kind of liminal signals between unconscious and conscious. It's like the little niggly voice at the
Right.
back of your
Yeah.
head says, you really didn't kind of pay attention to that problem yesterday with your
Mm-hmm.
boss. And often it starts to show up in physical symptoms, right?
Right.
Often our clients have tightness in the gut or thickness in the throat
Right.
or depression or
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, lots of nervous system dysregulation.
Right.
And so what he noticed was that when you allow and people feel safe enough because they're held in the
Right.
relationship to slow things down and take the time to listen to the physical symptoms, the signals in the body, the headaches, the illness, all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
that bodies actually know what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like you're upset. You go to your mom, or if you're lucky, or your grandma or somebody, your boyfriend, and you have a good cry
Mm-hmm.
or a good close friend, and you feel better.
Right.
You feel better.
Mm-hmm.
That's focusing as a natural process.
Mm-hmm.
That's the felt shift that they were looking for that clients described. They'd say, I don't know, I just feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Like a physical, oh,
Right.
you just feel better.
Yeah.
And so I knew that place in my own body.
Mm-hmm.
And when Gendlin described it and I saw it in the focusing community, so I worked with him for 30 years, I trained under him. And then I knew, oh yes, I know what that feeling is. I
Right.
used to feel it all the time when I'd come out of the therapist's office.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that natural process is what Gendlin then made into 6 little steps, because he said, well, if a lot of people can't find that in the body, and we're not targeting it in talk therapy, then maybe we could teach people how to come back to that natural process, or how to find it if they've been so shut down in their lives without enough safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the little 6 steps of focusing that help us to slow things down and to pay attention inside. And we do it in partnership. So in my model and in the new book that I've just published, 20 Embodied Practices for Healing Trauma and Addiction, it's all done in partnerships. And then also with a coach or a therapist. Yeah.
Yeah, it really, as you're talking, thinking about the power of the pause, and what can happen in that space. And it just made me really think about how important that felt sense of safety is, because for so many people, that pause is very uncomfortable if they don't feel safe. And so, like, starting with that place of creating safety and for people to tap into that natural wisdom that you talk about in their body is so important in this work.
Yes, and so well said. And so we start because we know in the nervous system that if we don't have enough safety, and this is the basis really of polyvagal theory, if we don't have enough safety, that what Steve calls the ventral branch of the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It goes right from the brainstem right down through our whole body and picks up on all this information from the organs in our body. And 80% of that information is visceral, it's embodied.
Wow.
But we bypass it, right? And so the vagus nerve then becomes really the foundation of how we do good work, because we're not going to be able to really reach people and help them to tap into that body wisdom.
Right.
They feel and their nervous system is picking up enough safety. Otherwise, we shift into the sympathetic flight fight state.
Right.
To try to either mobilize and fight back or to get out of there.
Right.
And there you see a lot of, anxiety issues, right? And if we can't do either of those things, like in developmental trauma, then the body shifts down into what Steve Porges named the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve. That's his contribution to one of them, but to really understanding what I call a trauma-informed understanding of the nervous system.
Right.
That before Steve, we didn't associate that dissociated ventral dorsal branch of the vagus with the traditional nervous system. And so that's when he named that and said, wait a minute, there's another state here. It's not just, ventral things are fine, and then we fly into sympathetic flight fight. There's another state in the nervous system that is really protective, and we would say adaptive under threat. And that state he called the dorsal branch. And that it really, I think polyvagal theory really has taken off so much because as trauma therapists, we knew that place. And that's what I saw in these women was that they were shifting from this activation into collapse. And it's like hibernating in the body. And that was helping them. It was an adaptive response in that environment that was so unsafe. And so that flips the paradigm. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Now, when we understand the wisdom of the body, we understand that in times of serious threat, when there's no escape, like incest, you're dead, you can't leave. The body has this beautiful way of protecting us by shutting us down so we don't feel it, and we often don't remember it even happened.
Right.
And so when you see it that way, you realize, oh, this isn't a disorder. It's actually a very ordered
Yes.
sequence
Mm-hmm.
in the nervous system.
Yes.
And that changes the pathologizing model into a strength-based model.
Right, right. And it feels like from there, there's so much liberation to then move towards healing when you reframe from that space, and for someone to understand that these are adaptive, that these are the very things that help them to survive those experiences, and that if they listen to, and can tap back into their body, they can move through towards healing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that shift in how you understand yourself when you've really suffered a lot, because we're not in any way saying that those adaptive behaviors are adaptive when you feel safe, because
Right.
they're not. They're
Mm-hmm.
really problematic when you
Right.
feel safe enough,
Mm-hmm.
where the body gets stuck
Right.
in these trauma feedback loops. And so our job is to create these neural exercises, Steve
Mm-hmm.
Gordon called them. We would say somatic practices,
Right.
like felt sensing, like meditation, like lots of different things, yoga practices, chanting, drumming, dancing, spiritual practices, all of these that help the body to come back into enough safety through
Mm-hmm.
what he calls the social engagement system. So that's the part of our body that is activated when we feel safe enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's connected up through the ventral vagus and up through our face and through our ear.
Mm.
So we give signals, we give
Right.
cues of safety to each other when we smile,
Mm-hmm.
when we feel we have a kind of open quality to our demeanor, our
Right.
physicality. And we can do that. We can choose to do that
Mm-hmm.
in the work that we do too. We can choose to be open like that with people and to make eye contact. Although that brings us back to a point that we're talking about here, that pausing and being open is very scary to a
Right.
threat nervous system.
Yes.
So we're very careful in how we start that process.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't go in, giving off these big cues of safety when somebody is really grieving or suffering or terrified.
Mm-hmm.
We go really slowly and gently and don't make eye contact necessarily, but we don't need to. And
Right.
we're learning more and more in working with diverse populations
Mm-hmm.
of people that there are many ways to connect, right? Slowing down the
Mm-hmm.
voice, the prosody, being really mindful of not intruding on a person's space, but taking our time and kind of earning that
Mm-hmm.
trust, right?
Right.
Slowly over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is really meeting the person where they're at. And, it's just making me think, because I know that there's kind of a buzz around the concept of psychological safety and creating that. And that comes from a good place and something we should strive for, of course, in a trauma-informed, practice. And what that means for an individual is going to vary. And
Very
like,
much so.
right, yeah.
Yeah, and I spent a fair amount of time in this new book talking about that, like that
Mm-hmm.
people experience safety and being unsafe in very different kinds of ways.
Right. Yeah.
And so we can be working with people that come from loving homes.
Mm-hmm.
Parents love their kids. They're providing um, a safe enough environment for the kids that they can relate to and connect with.
Mm-hmm.
But the children that parents have trouble understanding
Mm-hmm.
and then subsequently connecting with
Mm-hmm.
don't feel safe.
Right.
And so that's a terrible experience for them because they
Mm-hmm.
look at their siblings are fine.
Right.
They're joining the ski club, they're becoming lawyers, they're
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're doing,
Yep.
or in it doesn't matter what socio and economic group. I mean, you can be connected to your dad who's working shifts and you love it too, and they
Mm-hmm.
relate to each other.
Right.
You don't, you're in big trouble.
Mm-hmm.
in order to feel safe in that connection, we have to feel seen.
Right.
And appreciated for just who we are.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the good parenting thing as well. That's so important in all the work we do, right? As
Right.
kind of parenting figures in a way, is that we can even say to ourselves, I don't really understand my kids'
Mm-hmm.
choices and stuff, but I love them.
Right.
And it's not my job to
Mm-hmm.
agree with what they do in life.
Right.
It's my job to help them to enjoy themselves, appreciate
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and that will ripple out into the
Right.
world. And
Yes.
the same with our clients. We can have different political views,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a real challenge these days.
Right. Yeah.
But that's not our job. Our
Yep.
job is to support
Mm-hmm.
and respect that inner embodied wisdom.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Just meeting that person where they're at without judgment and embracing them and for all of who they are and the beauty that they are. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you're talking and thinking about like the role of the therapist, it just makes me think about, you know, people who are doing this work have exposure to a lot of trauma, you know, through just the nature of the work that they're doing. And I think, as you beautifully state, like they're the instrument through which this work happens.
We
And
are.
so, what are some of the things that you might recommend for people who are doing this work to help them take care of their own nervous system?
So I really very much believe that if we really have no business doing this work, because we're not going to do it well if we're not connected to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because really the most important thing is establishing that sense of presence with another person. And we can't do that unless we're connected to our own presence,
Right.
our own who we are,
Mm-hmm.
our own vulnerabilities in life, right? And we have to have this, I think, this kind of really beautiful balance of like showing up where you can feel the presence of the person in their vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you feel um, the therapist's capacity to hold you. You know, I have a vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
and I can hold you and be here with you. And in order to do that, you have to do your own work.
Right.
So in my trainings through the Polyvagal Institute, I'm an educational partner there, and I have a 3-year training program. The first course in running through the book, my first book,
Mm-hmm.
is everybody has a focusing partnership, and you learn the felt sense polyvagal model through your own experiencing.
Wow. Yeah.
And you know, people just do that naturally when they're attracted to this work because it's embodied.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're learning a concept like the concept of neuroception. So that's a word that Steve Porges invented.
Mm-hmm.
And he invented it because there was no word for this process, this unconscious process that we have in our bodies and our brainstem that scans continuously for how safe we are.
Mm.
Isn't that amazing? You
It
know,
is. Yeah.
just right now, you and I are sitting here, and my
Mm-hmm.
system unconsciously is scanning. Am I safe here? Is this an okay place for me to be?
Mm-hmm.
And noticing those cues when you smile, when you say back what you hear me say, and it feels right. All those cues are giving me a sense of safety,
Mm-hmm.
which then enables me to concentrate better and to be able to be more present with you and your audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that process that he named neuroception is one of the things that we teach in the model, how to name and recognize, and then how to rewire those nervous system states if your body is stuck in that trauma feedback loop of flight, fight, and then what we call fixate, which is the addiction place,
Mm-hmm.
and folding and collapsing into that dorsal state, and then back again. So swinging back and forth with self-harm often,
Right.
and behaviors that become addictive
Mm-hmm.
because you do them so frequently in order to try to find safety in the body.
Thank you for joining us today. Please visit our website, traumainformedny.org, for additional trauma-responsive resources, events, and training opportunities. Subscribe to our podcast to be notified when our next episode is released.